So yeah, whilst we wait, if you've got any particular question that you'd like us to address, or maybe a challenge, a particular topic, that'd be really helpful. If you could put this into the Q&A box or the chat, and then all the contributors on this call today can try to speak to it, or whilst other people are contributing, we can try to answer and field those questions directly. A quick overview of the webinar. I'll start with a quick introduction of Locality's climate work in a moment. I'm Johannes Müller. I'm part of the Locality's services team. And then my colleague Dave Ahlquist will spotlight a Locality member, the Bradford Trident, which is presented here by the CEO, Carlton Smith, who will tell us about their energy efficiency journey and some of the climate projects that they're involved with. And then we will hear from Julie Raymond and Madeleine Walker from Social Investment Business about the Energy Resilience Fund. And afterwards, we will share some of the Locality insights that we've gleaned from doing climate work over the past few years. We'll share some top tips about energy efficiency journey of community buildings. And then my colleague Dave will jump into talking about green business models, climate-focused outreach, and some funding opportunities that are out there at the moment. And that should be us for this Monday afternoon. So jumping straight into introducing Locality's climate work. First of all, Locality is a national network of community organizations in England. We are helping organizations to be strong and successful, helping to build a good operating environment for our members through policy and advocacy work. And what I would say, we have an evolving climate and net zero strategy, which is very much shaped by our members' experiences, many of whom are doing like really interesting work in the field. And what our members show is that climate work is community work. Community work is climate work. So there's a really strong connection between the two rather than it being separate. Climate work can really help meet the everyday needs of local people. It's got many co-benefits that my colleague Dave will be talking about later. And we also believe that adopting green business models and going on this energy efficiency journey can really strengthen community centres and assets, making them more resilient. So there's that economic case as well. And then we probably all know that the climate debate is very polarized at the moment, to say the least. What we see is that community organizations have a real leading role and can show what practical, inclusive climate leadership looks like. And can help ensure that everyone can benefit from the net zero agenda. We can imagine, or we can see, like how every community building can be centres for climate action, centres for climate resilience, without really calling themselves that. And we've got many members that do inspiring climate action, but that don't actually talk about climate at all. So in terms of our own work around the climate, we focus on three main areas. We work with community organizations and members to help them get their house in order, as we say, and improve the energy efficiency of community buildings. We support green business models and environmental projects, and we help current and potential members become climate action leaders in their communities. And our approach, our Locality's approach in general, combines training, resources, lots of peer learning with direct consultancy support, as well as research, policy work and influencing work. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a context of where we come from when we talk of climate action and energy resilience. And without further ado, over to my colleague Dave and Carlton Smith.
Thanks, Johannes. So my job really is just to introduce Carlton from Bradford Trident, one of the quite a large Locality member with its roots in New Deal for Communities going back to 2000. So this is kind of a really good example and some inspiring stuff across a estate of 4, or is it 5 buildings, Carlton, altogether. So loads of interesting stuff. I'm going to hand over and give the floor to you, Carlton, and people who've got any questions during Carlton's presentation, do pop them in the chat, or rather not the chat box, in the Q&A box, and we'll also allow some time for a few questions at the end. The floor is yours, Carlton. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave, and thanks, Johannes, and thank you, Locality, for inviting me to chat about some of the work that Bradford Trident does. So I'm Carlton Smith. I've been the Chief Exec for Bradford Trident since 2015. It's about 10 years now. Trident's a bit older than that. We're just celebrating our 25th year. So we started as a new deal in the community in 2000. Very luckily, we're given £50 million over 10 years by the then Labour government. And it was all about the renewal and regeneration of Little Horton, which has always been a very deprived ward in South Bradford, just south of Bradford city centre. It's always been a very diverse community. We get a lot of asylum seekers, and new people to the district seem to land in Little Horton. And we also have a very young population, with one of the youngest wards in the country, I believe. So we were gifted 50 million. And that was invested into neighbourhood renewal of various sorts. So there's crime reduction plan, there was investment into community rooms at our local schools, major regeneration of the green spaces across the ward, and there was some land clearance of old slums and old mills. And some of those spaces were used to create new community centres. And Bradford Trident was set up as a charity to manage those community centres going forwards, and also to then deliver a whole host of services that we still carry on to this day through those community buildings. So we've got 2 community centres, a health and children's centre, which hosts 2 GPs and a large nursery. We've got a bespoke business centre that's just got some businesses in, and in 2013 we were successful with an asset transfer of the local sports centre, which the council were going to close down, and the community rallied together to save and asked us to look after it for them. So we manage all those buildings for them. They're all quite large buildings, and as I say, deliver a variety of programmes through them. So we have a nursery. We're the grant holder for Better Start Bradford, which is offers 20 different, or has offered 20 different programmes for 0 to 4-year-olds to give them the best start in life. We have the sports centre, so lots of sports activities going on there. Healthy lifestyles projects. We run an active travel hub and bike library, and have recently started delivering wellbeing walks funded by West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And we also deliver Better Places, which supports young families to use their local green spaces and to engage and develop a sense of ownership of those places. And we've invested quite a bit into capital improvements with play areas specifically for very young children, and have really increased the usage of our local parks through that programme. So we're delighted to do all of that. On sort of climate agenda front, our board made a commitment through the Small and Medium Enterprise, or the SME Climate UK pledge. SME Climate UK is a UN-backed initiative for small enterprises to enhance their climate credentials and address their greenhouse gas emissions. So we made a pledge back in 2022 to halve our emissions by 2040, to halve emissions by 2030 and to reach net zero before 2040. But that's just our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So through that commitment, we have to report on our progress each year. So we give a carbon reduction report on our emissions and whether we're meeting our reduction targets, what sorts of activity we're undertaking to reduce those emissions, and we publish our carbon emission data. So both our scope 1 emissions, which are our direct emissions from fossil fuels, our scope 2 emissions, which are mostly through our usage of electricity, and then scope 3, which is wider indirect emissions. So it's linked to our staff commuting or our suppliers' logistics, our waste we generate, water we use, and materials we use in construction, business services we buy in, catering we use, and manufacture of equipment and other sorts. So it's really wide-ranging, the scope 3. Scope 1 and 2 are really easy to measure, I think. There's conversion factors that can be used, and really reliable figures can be produced with that if you're measuring how much gas and electricity you're using in your operations and buildings. The scope 3 emissions are much more complex, and most organizations use a proxy, which some clever academics have worked out through various models, and it's generally related back to how much you spend on different aspects of your operations, and again, I think they provide or use conversion factors to then form this scope 3 emissions figure. The SME Climate Hub has a wealth of resources on it, which really useful. I've found very useful anyway. There's some online learning courses you can do. There's their business carbon calculator, which is free to use. And as I say, the scope 1 and 2 results are very reliable. The scope 3, I don't know. I'll leave that to others to say how reliable those are, but it gives you a methodology you can use same year after year, so you get comparable figures year on year, so you can see whether you're making progress or not, and that's useful, I think. And it's also a platform to publish what you're doing. The two pictures there, one's our Parkside Sports Centre after recent renovations, which we'll talk about a bit later, and the muddy field picture is the equipment store that we built on the back of it as part of the renovation, also, which I'll come to in a little bit. So our board made this commitment back in 2022, and we were also then beginning to feel the initial increases in energy costs. And as the owners and operators of 5 buildings, large buildings, that's quite a hefty chunk of the resources that we need to find each year. So we were keen to not only do our bit for the climate challenge, but also to reduce our running costs and cut down our fuel bills. And the approach we took towards that was to do quite a lot of research. So the UK SME Climate Hub was very useful, as has been the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and Energy Saving Trust websites also got a whole host of stuff that's really useful, easy to understand, and pretty easy to apply to what you're doing. We've followed the energy saving hierarchy. So we did the easy things first. We talked to the people that are using the buildings, asked them to switch lights off, turn down thermostats, turn the heating down rather than open the windows on freezing cold days. All the little things that just help to nudge down your energy usage. We did big reviews of our building, really got to understand how the heating systems worked, what we had in place, double glazing wise, insulation wise, and what we didn't, what was missing. And also, what hours the buildings were used, when we were switching heating and lighting on and off. So really trying to look at the whole picture of how we were using the buildings and to nudge that so it was more efficient, and we were stopping wasting heating the building when there was nobody in it, that sort of stuff. Only switching the heating on 30 minutes, an hour before people wanted to use the building, rather than at 3 o'clock in the morning as we were doing before. We also identified all the drafty bits of the building, so round old windows, front doors really leaky, if you've not got good draft excluders, holes in the walls, dodgy roofs. All of that was sorted out, and cut down our drafts a lot. And we've always looked after the buildings very well, so keeping them in a good state of repair and up to scratch is a really important first step. Keep the weather out, keep the buildings dry, makes them much cheaper to heat and look after. We then looked at improving the fabric of the buildings, so looking at what insulation options we had to make them nice and cozy and comfortable. And then lastly, we've looked at adding renewable energy onto them. So we've had this big audit of all our buildings. We knew what we had, how we were using them, how much electricity and gas we were using in each building, and what we wanted to do improvement-wise. The next big bit was to find the resources to pay for all the works we then wanted to do. And we've been quite lucky on that over the years. First one we really did was Parkside Sports Centre. That was built in the 1960s. The great Eddie Charlton came and opened it for them back then. And it's been a real kingpin of the local area for 60 years now. Almost everyone you speak to in Bradford seems to have played five-a-side football in Parkside at one point or another. And there's a lot of very fond memories of sports and activities in the building. So it was a bit of a no-brainer once the community let us know that they wanted to keep it, that it was an asset we would look after and develop for them. But it was beginning to show its age a bit, and particularly the sports equipment storage area was very poor. Stuff was just piled in with the old gas boilers, so it wasn't really fit for purpose in many ways. So we've gathered quite a big redevelopment plan, initially working with the English Cricket Board to put on some indoor cricket lanes. Unfortunately, that modelling didn't really work, and the whole scheme just got too expensive and didn't get off the ground. And we're also looking for levelling up money to help pay for it, and very little of that ended up coming to West Yorkshire. So that was a bit of a non-starter. But through that process, we'd also identified the energy saving measures we needed to do to the building, and we had applied to some quite large grant fund holders. So Garfield Western Trust were our big heroes first to step up and support what we wanted to do. The Cloth Workers Foundation also put in a good chunk of money. Thank you for them. Sports England came through for us, and we're very responsive to our changing needs. And we've got various other local funders that supported it, including Bradford Council. So we took the grandiose schemes we developed with the Cricket Board, brought them a bit more down to earth on what we could do with the money we'd managed to pull together, and that was still addressing the needs that were identified by the community. And we built the really nice large equipment store on the side, improved the insulation in the roof. We've completely upgraded all the LED lights in the building, so that has brought down the electricity demand big style. We took out the creaking on their knees old gas boilers and put in air source heat pumps, and we put quite a large 56 kilowatt solar array on the sports roof, which just happens to point directly south, and complement that PV solar array a 50 kilowatt hour battery, so we can run, or we can benefit from the solar energy right into the evening, which is when the building's used the most, really. So that's radically changed our fuel consumption. It's also made the building much more comfortable to be in, and dramatically reduced our greenhouse gas emissions. So our gas consumption has dropped from 115 megawatt hours to 12 megawatt hours a year, which is 90% reduction in our gas. We still use a little bit of gas for heating the hall, just the main hall. We were looking at electric heaters in there, but we would have needed a massive substation, so that didn't prove economical. But we have 90% reduction in our gas usage, which is really good. And combined with that, we've managed to stay at the same electricity usage. So this chart shows the gas usage over the last few years. So the dark blue line and the orange line are the old gas usage before any changes were done. And then the green line just is quite high up until February, where we did the changeover. We got the solar panels and the heat pumps working there. And that's where our gas has dropped down to very little. So we don't use any through the summer at all now, and then just a little bit for the main hall through November through to March, which is the light blue line on the left-hand side. Excuse me. So, huge reduction in our gas usage, and that's where most of the greenhouse gas emissions were coming from. So our annual carbon saving has been 103,000 kilowatt hours of gas a year. So that's how much gas we're not using, which times by the conversion factor for natural gas gives us 21 tons of carbon we're saving each year by making those changes. So we're really pleased with that. The renovations altogether cost us £330,000. As I say, most of that was through charitable foundations, so our contribution was 30 grand, I think. And the return on investment on the savings we made through our fuel bills is 9 years. We should recoup all that money for the energy elements of the work. We didn't upgrade any of the radiators when we put the air source heat pumps. We thought we'd run them for a winter and see how what we had would operate. And since we've identified that 4 of the radiators need upgrading to something a bit more substantial, so we're doing that work this summer, and be even snugger next year. So overall, our greenhouse gas emissions for Trident as a whole organisation has dropped from 305 tonnes a year in our baseline year, which is 22, down to 166 tonnes. So we've almost halved it, or more than halved it so far in our scope 1, well, mostly from our scope 2 emissions, because we've reduced our energy usage across the whole estate by 20%, and at the same time we've increased our solar electricity input by 7%. So we've got about 30% total reduction in electricity. So this chart shows, again, for Parkside, with the introduction of the air source heat pumps instead of the gas boilers. The dark blue line and orange line, again, are sort of what we typically used before. And then the green line is the year when the transition was made. So the air source heat pump kicked in computer saying it's low. Don't see that, sorry. Air source heat pump kicked in the green line, 24, and because of the solar panels, our electricity usage through the summer was very, very low. So sort of 6 months of the year, hardly using any electricity from the main. And then in the winter, our electricity usage actually gone up because of the air source heat pumps, but it's overall, it's the same as before. But we're getting much of that electricity from the PV now rather than the grid as we were before then. So we've also looked at other buildings and have been successful with the Energy Enabler Fund from Northeastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. So they gave us Energy Project Enabler Fund. So we got some money from them to do our Mayfield Centre and match fund that through the Energy Resilience Fund, thanks to Social Investment Business. And that's paid for these things you can see on the screen now. So on the left is a 50 kilowatt battery, which is a big tall fridge-like thing on the left. And on the right is some of the new solar panels. So that's about a third, I think, of the panels that have been put on through the recent funds through SIB and others. So the Mayfield project altogether has cost £73,000, of which about 28 is a repayable loan, but we're making, or we should make, annual savings of £13,000. So we'll repay that in about 2 years. So that's great. And then we've got a bid in with them at the moment for two other buildings, Edward Street and Park Lane, for another 105,000. That's for LED lights, air source heat pumps at Park Lane, and insulation works at Edward Street. And that's part grant, part loan, and the loan will be 76,000 quid, which will take us about 8 years to repay on the amounts we should save through it. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlson. So any of you attendees, do feel free to pop any questions for Carlson in the Q&A box. Well, I mean, I've got 1 or 2 questions, Carlson. You know what? So you mentioned about changing behaviour, you know, in terms of just the kind of, you know, in a way that's the first thing you do, isn't it? Switching off the light switches and so on. I just wondered how easy that was to do, and particularly as we've got a business centre, so you're kind of asking third-party kind of clients and customers to change their behaviour. How easy is that to do?
They were quite lengthy conversations with people. I think if you share the information with them, make people aware of how much it costs to run these buildings, they're always a bit startled just how much it is, how much of, we have 38 organisations we host across all the buildings, but our fuel bills are £500,000 quid a year. So it's quite eye-watering sums, and I think people appreciate it a bit more once they get the figures of how much it does cost, how much of their rent goes towards it, and also how other buildings are performing that are managing their electricity a bit better. So some of our leases cover the electricity and gas, and some don't. And the ones that people pick up their own bills, they use a lot less energy than the ones where it's just incorporated in their rent year on year. So making people aware of that is very beneficial. And yeah, just the simple thing of sticking reminders next to lights and changing the hall and communal areas into motion activated sensors so they turn off automatically. They're quite good. And the key one is getting people to use the thermostats and the heating controls sensibly, rather than just whacking them up and then going away for the weekend and forgetting about it.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in from participants. Julian, in fact, I'll probably ask them both and ask you to take them one at a time. So Julian is asking, was this the first loans? How did trustees feel about that? I think it's a question about switching from grants to loan finance. And the second question is, did water use get factored into considerations? Presumably it's quite high in a sports centre if you have showers.
So the loans, so the Mayfield loan was the first loan. Well, no, it was the second. We had a social investment loan during COVID to deliver COVID-related works. I forget specifically what it was, but that was blended finance and a reasonable deal. It didn't take too long to repay it, but it did provide a huge amount of immediate benefit to the area. So it was a big step for the trustees because they'd mostly had grants before. We were beginning to get more and more commissions then, so a bit more business-like. And then the loan was quite a different way again to finance operations. So the board took quite a long time to consider it and look at it from all the options. But the social investment is generally, in the round, a good option. And I think once they'd given it proper consideration, they went for it. But it did take quite a while to convince them. And then when the energy related blended finance came along, the sums just make sense in that, without the loan, you can't provide that amount of investment to make the savings you want to make. And it just makes it all, achievable. You can get enough money to do the works to make the savings. Okay, it then takes you 7-8 years to pay back some of it, but you're reaping the benefits straight away. So and you've got them forevermore afterwards. So it's seeing it in the longer term and being comfortable that you've got an operating model that's going to generate the surpluses you need to repay the fund. So it's having a good forecast on how much you're going to save through the investment, plus reliable business model that you're working off to cover the repayments. So it's getting all the information and presenting it as clearly as you can, which Social Investment Bank and others will happily help with.
So there's an element of reticence at first, but in terms of putting together clear numbers and projections, then that was able to, you were able to get the board on board, so to speak. Did you have any? The other question was about water use.
So we do measure it in all our buildings, not just the sports centre. Sports centre actually uses surprisingly little. I think because we're quite high level of South Asian clients. Most people tend to go home to shower, so we don't actually have many people use our showers, which is kind of nice in a way. Good for us anyway. But they're there if people want them, and some of the teams do, and many of them don't. We have, a lot of our users are local people, so they only live half a mile away or so anyway. So it's easy enough for people to pop home and grab their showers there. But we did a few years before upgrade the plumbing to pressure taps and low flow toilets and all that sort of thing. So it has been considered and some investment put into it prior, but our water usage isn't massive.
Great, thanks, Carl. Just one, which I think will make the final question, because then we'll move on. But in the chat, Helena has asked, have you looked into using these new renewable resources as part of a wider community energy project, so that enable you to, I think I'm understanding your question correctly, Helen. I'll actually give you permission to talk if you want to correct me, but I think this is really about whether you've thought about partnering locally with a community energy organisation to do, actually generate some energy or sell back to the grid or so.
Sorry, go on, Helen.
Yeah, no, it was just obviously with that's a lot of PV you've got, which I'm assuming you're exporting. I was just wondering if there was any community energy projects in the area, or if this was something you were looking to potentially become involved with, obviously to benefit your community as well, but also gives you the opportunity to negotiate your import and export rates.
So our first 2 arrays, which were 30 kilowatts each, on 2 of the community centres, we did with Bradford Community Energy. So they held community share offer to raise, it's about £60,000, I think, to put solar arrays on those buildings, and we're in a power purchase agreement with them since. So that's been running about 5-6 years now. So we have used that route as well. So they raised the money. It was part of the booster program. So any money they raised through community shares was matched by the booster program, which Co-ops UK then hold the shares. So 50% of the shares are held with Co-ops UK, 50% with Bradford Community. We bought a few, and a few of the other local community organisations bought shares as well. And then, we use all the electricity those solar arrays produce, or most of it. A little bit goes into the grid. They managed to get them on before the feed-in tariff offer closed, so they get the feed-in tariff for that as well. That goes all back to them. And we get fairly cheap electricity. So everybody's a winner.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Carlton. And you've already name checked the Energy Resilience Fund and SIB, so that will make a nice segue now. But Carlton, thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this and come and share your experience with us. I don't know if you're planning to stay for the rest of the session. You're very welcome to. And the resources you kind of flagged up will be shared with participants afterwards. But Johannes, are you happy for me to just hand over straight away to, I think, Madeline, you're going to go first with some kind of the really interesting research you've been doing, and then handing over to Julie to talk in practice about the practical considerations around the Energy Resilience Fund as one really key example of a funding opportunity to fund some of this stuff. Is that okay? And over to you, Madeline.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Madeline, part of the data and research team at SIB, working on data quality. So I've been reviewing the ERF applications, information and calculating energy savings, which we will be discussing later on. I'll pass on to Julie first. She's just got a few kind of outlines and introduction to SIB, and then I'll kind of go on to an overview of the research as well.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for your time today. So yeah, we're here to discuss the Energy Resilience Fund, which is one of our new funds that we've recently launched, and which Carlton did a grand job of introducing for us. So this is kind of the session outline here. It's a bit of sort of, you know, what the fund is, what the criteria is, and how you can apply. So if we're just moving on to the sort of the introduction to SIB, bit of background to us. We started in 2002 as the Adventure Capital Fund, been involved in delivering a whole range of loan and grant products, mainly on behalf of government departments, with our overall aim of trying to make the sector stronger and support organisations like yourselves that are delivering and to make a difference in the community that you work in. So moving on to the ERF fund, it is a continuation, if you like, of the Key Fund pilot, and we have continued that and are working with mainly the same organisations that are involved in that pilot. So that's the organisations that we're working with shown on that slide. The fund itself is a £15 million fund. It offers 60% loan, 40% grant, which is used towards strengthening the energy resilience of the sector. So funding can be used for either property development works or for equipment, including vehicles. So in terms of energy resilience, that can be a range of areas, be a number of reasons why you want to improve your energy resilience. That could be around cost savings, changes to legislation, and generally just wish to make your building more comfortable for your users, or replacing equipment that is less energy efficient. So I'll hand back to Madeline just to run through some of the energy research we've done.
Thanks, Julie. So here's a brief overview of some of the findings taken from research carried out by our colleagues at SIB last year into energy efficiency of non-domestic properties in England and Wales. And there were some interesting findings, and definitely worth reading through the paper and the link. If you have time, I'll pop it in the chat. So non-domestic EPCs are calculated using the Simplified Building Energy Model, SBEM. So this model provides each building with an asset rating, which is a measure of how energy efficient a building is. So a lower asset rating indicates a better energy efficiency. So the EPC scores of like A plus to C. And whilst EPCs are not like the most perfect measure of overall energy efficiency, a low rating can result in increased utility bill prices for heating and potentially losing out on funding in the future. Also lowering the value of a property if it came to selling or renting in the future, as Julie mentioned. And that's kind of especially important with the government regulations coming in to align with the net zero targets. As we can see from the bar chart on the bottom right there, the majority of community buildings have an EPC rating of D, with more buildings on the lower end of that energy efficiency. And the graph on the top right shows the difference between non-domestic property asset rating scores. As we can see with the blue line, community buildings aren't at the same level of non-domestic properties in their asset rating scores, which takes us on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we've got some kind of information here. So although it was found community buildings weren't improving their energy efficiency at more than double the rate of other non-domestic properties, the good news is that improvements are being made and there is still time and resources to help with them, such as the Energy Resilience Fund. And finally, the research looked at every recommendation held in an EPC rating of a community building and calculated the cost of the upgrades, which we can see in the bar chart. So approximately £31,000 is required per building. Obviously, this will differ on an individual basis, some needing more, some needing less. And to see how that compares with reduction in greenhouse gas emissions produced, they calculated it would be the equivalent of taking 5 cars worth of emissions off the road per building per year, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if we total up the buildings, it would be similar to taking the equivalent emissions produced by 73,000 cars off the road, which like an average petrol van car produces about 1 to 2 tons of CO2 per year. And now moving on to Julie with eligibility.
So yeah, we're going to a bit of background to the fund. In terms of sort of the eligibility criteria, there's the key eligibility criteria, and I've also got a link to our website, which we can share with you. Primarily, you need to be based in England or serving communities primarily within England. You would need to be incorporated and been operating for a minimum of 2 years with a minimum turnover of £100,000, which is in your last set of annual accounts. If you are applying for property works, you will need to have a minimum of 12 years left on a lease or own the property. So that's kind of one of the things we'll look at as part of the eligibility assessment. We also have on the next slide some areas which show areas that aren't eligible. So generally it's the size of the organisation, and kind of something I think that Helen was referring to earlier in terms of sort of that community energy district heat networks is something that we can't fund under this particular fund, but there are other funds available for that. So the full eligibility criteria is on that link there, and again we can get that sent out to you or included in the chat. So moving on to the next slide, we'll have a look at the terms of the fund. So it is blended finance, which means it is 60% loan, 40% grant. The minimum we can do is 25,000, the maximum is 25,000. That is per organisation rather than per property. You do have, if you're applying for multiple properties, as Bradford Trident have, you do need to put an application for each property, and it is a maximum of £250,000 per organisation rather than per property. We're looking at sort of a minimum of 2-year repayment to up to 10 years, and there is the potential for a 12-month interest-only payment period in the first year. There's a bit about the interest rate there, an arrangement fee. It is unsecured debt, which makes it a little bit preferable for boards. I know a lot of people can be a bit cautious about taking on debt finance. In terms of the funding itself, once you've been through our application process and it's all been approved, then the funds are released at the beginning. So it's not in arrears. You don't have to pay for the work and then come back and claim the money. That can all be paid up front. And there are no early repayment fees. So if you decide you take a loan for 5 years, you get a windfall or legacy payment, and you decide that actually you want to repay that earlier, that's absolutely fine. There's no concerns about that. Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? Oh.
Okay. That's a bit too big there. Okay, well, here's an overview of application statuses. I guess I'll read them out. So the number of applications we've had 43 so far, and 9 of them have been approved. There's 19 under assessment and 15 unsuccessful. And the total amount requested is almost 5.5 million so far, and the approved amount is over 750,000. And then there's a kind of breakdown of the grant and loan amount there. So like I say, there's 19 that's still under assessment, and one's actually going to the committee today. And any unsuccessful applications have been mainly due to the financial risk regarding repayments, and also kind of applications for equipment or measures which actually just aren't energy efficient enough to really meet the criteria to be funded. But yeah, £750,000 approved so far, so plenty left, which is great. So next slide, please.
Madeline, just to come in, and apologies for that glitch on that slide. I'll put the text from the slide into the chat so people can see that.
Oh, thank you for that. Sorry, on the last slide there was a map there as well, also kind of showing where it's been funded, and on this one there's another map, but I'll discuss that in a moment. So here's just some information on the organisations that have been funded so far. So as we can see, organisations from multiple backgrounds. And at the bottom is a chart to show the diversity of organisations that have applied. This is kind of more just for our own research, and won't impact whether an application is successful or not. The map on the right, let's say, shows the locations of applications in association with the IMD score. So I'm sure many of you are already aware, it stands for Index of Multiple Deprivation. So this is kind of the official measure of relative deprivation in England, often used in the context of poverty and social welfare, with 1 being the most deprived areas, which are the points in green. And then next slide, please. And this is kind of just an overview of what the funds have been used for and can be used for. So many measures such as insulation, solar panels, pieces of equipment, things Carlton mentioned before, which many of you are already aware of. And yeah, that's the general breakdown there. So next slide, please. And this is Julie.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of case studies that we've included in the slides. Obviously, there is a lot of information in the slides. We will arrange for those to be sent out if anybody does need them. I think it's just interesting to take from this slide sort of the variety of works. You know, if you looked on the previous slide, we've seen we funded a tractor, we funded LED lighting, you know, insulation, but we can also fund enabling works. So if you wish to install solar panels, but you have a survey and the roof says that your roof isn't strong enough for those panels, we can also fund that as part of the investment. So this slide was just to give you a brief overview of kind of, you know, a couple of examples that we have funded so far. So on this next section, we're going to go through the application process. The applications process is fairly simple. It's online via the SIB website. We will have a link to the website later. At the point of applying, you can choose to either work with SIB and have us assess your application, or with one of our partners. It might be that you have an existing relationship with a partner, or you have a building that's listed, so you may feel like you may want to work with our Architectural Heritage Fund, but you're completely free to choose who you wish to work with on the application. And when you do submit the application, there are some attachments that we ask for. So some of those supporting documents include some annual accounts, your management accounts. If you're applying for property, it will be included in a lease or your title deeds for the project. And one of the things we do ask is if you have had an energy audit carried out in the past 2 years, if you can attach that as well. So once you've submitted your application, we'll look at it, we'll assess it. If you don't have an energy audit, that is something that we can fund for you on your behalf. We have appointed, just to explain a little bit more about the energy audit. We have contracted with 3 independent energy auditors. I say if we feel like you do need an energy audit, we will allocate one of those consultants to work with you. They will come out and visit you. They will visit the site. They will have discussions with you. And that will result in a report being provided to you, at which you can then have discussions with the auditor about, make sure you're happy with everything, understand any sort of recommendations they're making, and then have a chat with them also about which ones you wish to go ahead with. Often you'll find that the energy audit comes through and it's a bit of a shopping list, and it might be that you think, actually, we can't afford all of that at this point, or there are areas that will have more benefit than others. And the energy auditor will support you through that process. Just to note on that the audit can take up to 60 business days to complete. Just bear that in mind in terms of your planning process, but also that it cannot be applied for as a standalone element of the fund. So you need to come with us with a good idea of what it is that you're wanting to do and how much you think it's likely to cost, whether you've just sort of gathered a quick quote or spoken to a similar organisation in your area who's had work done already. So yeah, Madeline.
Oh, sorry, can we just go back to that other slide? Yes, that's the one. Yeah, thank you. So here are the key metrics we use from the energy audits. So identifying the most impactful upgrades that would be available. Audits can help organisations prioritise improvements that deliver long-term sustainability. And just to note, like Julie just mentioned, we can also use data from quotes provided by suppliers and contractors who carry out the work also. So we get lots of kind of quantitative and qualitative data on the potential energy, carbon and cost savings. So by comparing an organisation's energy use over a 12-month period, which is gathered from energy bills, we can then compare and calculate what savings would be after implementing the energy efficient instalments. So for example, say if an organisation used 40,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, we then calculate the carbon emissions being produced from this, and that's obviously if they aren't on an renewable energy tariff already. So that would be the equivalent of 8.2 tons of carbon dioxide, and that is calculated using the greenhouse gas conversions provided by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Then say, for example, they were to install LED lighting that could save them 15,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year. That would reduce their emissions by about 3 tons of CO2 equivalent. Another example would be switching from kind of an old diesel van to an EV, electric vehicle. So we would compare the models, the usage and emissions. So that's something you'd be interested in applying for. It's very helpful for us during the application if you provide details of what the model of the older vehicle is, an approximate like yearly mileage, and then what the new EV maker model will be, and then we can compare that then and just show how much energy you'll be saving. So all that kind of aforementioned information is really necessary for us to assess if the fund criteria is being met. And as the fund progresses, we'll be able to do some really interesting analysis to see what the progress is and how much greenhouse gas emissions have been saved from going into the atmosphere from kind of implementing all these measures. And that's it for me. Thank you.
So just to clarify, that information will be as part of the energy audit. We're not expecting everybody to understand any of that or to know what their figures are going to be. So please don't worry about that. That's something technical that the energy auditor looks at and then will be in your report, and they will explain that to you. So if this is still focusing on kind of property, so once you've had your audit and you've had those conversations with the auditor about what measures you wish to go ahead with, we then do ask for 3 quotes for the work. We don't have a say in which organisations you go out to quote to, or whether, you know, which quote you decide to go with. That's entirely up to yourselves, whatever your organisation feels most comfortable with. We will then look at the financial viability, because obviously there is a 60% loan, so there is repayable finance here. And we'll be looking at that through sort of the cash flow forecast, but we can support you again with that. And we have templates for those to help you with that. Just to make it very clear that this is a supported process the whole way through. So you will have a dedicated relationship manager who will work with you the whole way through this application. And we'll do our best to get it to the position where we can get it to one of our committees for a decision. If you are successful, as I said previously, you know, there'll be a bit of due diligence information carried out and some checks on the organisation, but then funds are released in one go upfront, and we will continue to work with you after the funds have been released and for the term of the loan. So hopefully that's given you a brief overview of what the fund can be used for in the application process. This next slide just sets out some kind of key benefits of applying to the fund. Obviously, the key one is that it's a blended finance package and it's 40% grant element, which is quite popular, let's say that. It's flexible, so it can be used for anything: buildings, vehicles, equipment. The only vehicles it can't be used for are hybrid that cannot be plugged in. So as long as the vehicle or equipment can be plugged in at the mains, then that's fine. You know, we can cover those enabling works, we can cover project management time. The loan itself, there are no early repayment charges, as mentioned before. So if you do wish to repay early, that's absolutely fine. That's not an issue. It's a very simple, straightforward application. And again, it will be supported the whole way through. So yeah, that's the fund. So thank you for your time today. If anybody has got any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or the question and answer box. And then there's an application link there to our website, which again, we can put in the chat box if you are interested in applying for the fund or finding out some more information.
Thank you so much, both of you. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat and the Q&A yet, but feel free to quickly pop any questions in there. I think we have the facility to put hands up. Not 100% sure on that, but I think we do. But there is a question from Carlson, which is always a brilliant one for funders. So you, in your figures you flagged up, Madeline, you said 15 applications had not been successful. What types of issues has counted against them? Are you able to give an answer there?
I think some of them have been mixed. We've had a couple that were too large and went against kind of that criteria we have. We have some that were too small, that weren't, you know, once we started working with them, it became clear that actually repayable finance wasn't the right thing for them. So we can provide them with access to other organisations that might be more relevant. A lot of it has been around property in the lease. We are aware that 12 years remaining on a lease is a long term, but the fund is long term. You'll find a lot of the repayment terms on energy measures are quite long. So we would ideally want to be able to fund organisations that are going to have that maybe 7-year payback period for solar panels that are then going to be there to benefit that, rather than the property going back to the landlord and the sector not actually benefiting from those cost savings.
Thank you. Okay, we're popping, that's the link in the chat for applications. All these links and so on we'll be sending through to participants later on. For now, Madeline, Julie, can I just thank you so much for prepping this, coming along and telling people about this. I hope you do get some strong applications from participants today. We want to spend the last half an hour of the session. And again, Madeline and Julie, feel free to stay for the rest of the session. If you need to pop off, that's also fine. We wanted to just spend the last half an hour talking through a couple of aspects of, from our perspective. First, in terms of some top tips for progressing energy efficiency of renewable energy projects. And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time at the end just talking about more of the kind of outreach that community organisations can do, and what sort of spin-off business models, and telling a little bit about how we can support at locality. So with that, Johannes, am I okay to hand the button back to you, please?
Absolutely. And just to add that at the very end, we also have a few slides on funding opportunities as well. Because we know, of course, that's what a lot of people are interested in, and they are needed for progressing a lot of these projects. I'll start off with 3 top tips or focuses when we to help you progress this journey of energy efficiency and renewable energy. This comes very much from the work that we've done with our members. The first top tip is about knowing your building. And I'll be talking through the energy audit in a little bit more detail that both SIP and Carlton have mentioned already. There's also a DIY version of that I'll mention. I'll talk you through a little tool called the Solar Wizard, and then we'll be looking at some of the quick wins and low-cost measures that you could focus on. And we'll share a checklist with you. And then there is that dilemma sometimes around, what do I do now? What do I do later? So we talk a bit about making plans for the long term. So starting with the DIY audit, the Centre for Sustainable Energy has developed this questionnaire type tool that you can use to assess your building. It basically asks you a lot of questions, which you then fill into a form, and there's then some guidance notes that you can take to refer back to see what you might want to do to make improvements. So it looks at the basic details of your building, the building conditions, drought, ventilation, heating systems, lighting, water use, energy behaviors. So yeah, really recommend that you check that out. That tool from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and it's not like it's not going to give you like a checklist of what you must do, but it's really helpful for understanding your building, and that is really the first step on this journey of energy efficiency. We talked about the professional energy audits that you can commission, and I thought it would be nice to show you how it might look like. Obviously, you get a full report that was mentioned, but this table is really the heart of an energy audit. They do look slightly different, but mostly have this kind of information on here. And what you'll see is on the left-hand side, there are all the potential recommendations, how you can, like the energy saving measures. And then second column from the right gives you the simple payback period. And that really looks at the cost, the estimated cost, which is in the column beside it, and how much you can save per year. So that's the third column from the left. And what we can see here is, for example, LEDs, they've got a very quick payback period. And we see that there can be any time from like 2 years to 4 years. I think that's very common. Solar PV often has a payback period around 7 years, but it can also go up and down a little bit depending on your roof and the angle of all of that. And then there's some other measures you see, for example, the cavity wall insulation. That's like a building fabric improvement. They often have a longer payback period. Of here, this is an example of the cavity wall insulation. 22 years would be paying back. The investment would be paid back by the savings. But I think, Carlton, you mentioned the energy hierarchy, and it is recommended to include also these longer term measures if they have to do with just making your building, the building fabric, improving the building fabric. Then an energy audit might highlight an improvement like air-to-air source heat pump. There's a bit of savings here in this scenario. You know, they can always differ, of course, but it's not the kind of investment that you necessarily make to save money in itself, but it's a good option when you have to replace a boiler. And of course, it varies from building to building. But we wanted to show you one of the examples of how this output of an energy audit might look like. For anyone who likes to play a little bit while listening to a webinar, you could also try out the Solar Wizard, which is a really clever tool. So if you go on the website here, that's on the screen, you can just go to the page, type in your postcode, find your property, and then it will tell you the solar potential of the property. So if you are thinking of solar energy or just curious whether it's at all an option for you, then this is a nice DIY way of seeing what the potential is. This is the solar potential of, I think, the Southwest's biggest community-led music venue, the Cheese and Grain, that have a massive roof. They've got some solar panels on it already. Yeah, so a nice thing to play while you continue listening to us, hopefully. I said I would talk about quick wins and low cost measures. Locality has developed a little checklist. I'm not going to run through that, all of those options, but you can download the checklist on this link. We'll pop it in the chat later as well. And just to explore whether you have gone through the low cost, easy things that you can do. One of the ones that always surprises me is about lowering the thermostat by 1 degree, which can save up to 10% of the heating costs. So yeah, please do go on the website, download it, and just go through and see which ones you're already implementing and which ones might be another option. I think, Carlton, you mentioned general maintenance really matters as well. Keeping it drought-free, keeping the building dry is really important. So general maintenance plan goes hand in hand with making sure that you save on energy as much as possible. And yeah, finally, so moving on from the quick wins to the bigger refurbishment projects, our recommendation is always to start with a vision, think big. Where do you want your building to be in the next 5 to 10 years' time? That's important whether you get grants or social investment. A lot of energy efficiency projects need to be a bigger plan for improvement. And taking a joined up approach includes looking at energy use, the layout, accessibility, repair needs, and user needs all together. I recently visited a community venue, community building in Bristol, And they had included these brilliant secondary doors for draft exclusion, made a big difference to about maintaining the heat in the building. But then what happened was that it was really difficult for wheelchair users to use the front entrance, which meant that the door had to be propped open quite a lot of the time. So that's just an example of why it's important to take a really joined up approach of energy efficiency, accessibility, the general repair of the building, and the needs of your users. We always recommend starting early with the right people, involving trustees, staff, service users, and professionals where possible. Completing the surveys, trying to get funding to get a building survey, an energy survey, and whilst you're doing it, also an accessibility service to then help you to develop these long-term plans. And there are lots of organizations that can support you doing this. You know, this is capital development is very new to community organization, to many community organizations. It can be complex. Local VCSE support organizations or national organizations like Locality can really support and help with the feasibility and the planning process. As we heard from SIP as well, if you are eligible to apply, then they can also support you on that journey to implement these larger projects. We've heard a lot about energy efficiency and buildings, so we'll put a pause to that now, and I'll hand over to Dave, who will talk about green business models, climate outreach, and all of that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so should we carry straight on with this section, do you think? People can just continue to put any questions in the Q&A or comments in the chat. Yeah, as Johannes was saying, I think it's right that we kind of focus most of this webinar on, if you like, getting your own house in order, looking at the emissions reductions and measures you can make within your own building or buildings. You know, the audience here is COF, Community Ownership Fund grantees, locality members. Most of you will have buildings, and that's definitely something you can do. But for me, there's another side to this, which is we're all also community organizations, and a lot of our impact can be, and I would potentially say possibly more of their impact aggregated across the wider network across the country. It could be from doing kind of outreach work, investigating kind of spin-off business opportunities, and other kind of outreach, which is kind of related to climate, but also delivering kind of co-benefits in areas like health. So I'll just flag up a couple of things. One is some research we did by way of an example into community business and climate action. I'll later on go to talk about a little bit about what we can offer in terms of our consultancy team and some examples of the support we've provided to organizations there. And we'll finish with, as Johannes said, a little bit of additional funding about, a little bit of additional information about some possible funding sources. So yeah, just flagging up by way of an example, this Community Business and Climate Action report we collaborated with some others on, with the IPPR and Power to Change. And this was specifically to start to develop like a typology, and this report, by the way, is available on Locality's website. We looked at all the different kinds of community business that organizations have developed across the country. So some of those examples were flagged in case studies within this report. The famous biggest wind turbine community built wind turbine in the country, built in Bristol by Ambition Lawrence Weston. Kind of what's interesting about them is that the wind turbine wasn't the important thing in a way. What was important was that it was providing an income to the community. So they kind of took a different view on that. Paint recycling is kind of, I'll come on to it in the next slide, but what we tried to look at, we tried to analyze how easy these different kind of models of community business are for a community organization to get into. Paint recycling, I think, kind of one of the easier ones in many ways. We looked at flower growing, we looked at all electric car clubs. You know, the thing about kind of car sharing is that there was lots of community initiatives quite successful, especially in urban areas, so successful that the private sector started to get in on the act, and with things like Zipcar and so on. But in terms of all electric, it's still kind of quite a popular thing, particular need in rural areas for community organisations to get involved. Waste and recycling, community farming, etc., etc. There's a whole range of those case studies. We're still working on some of this stuff. So if you're kind of interested in starting at something as a spin-off, as a potential opportunity, as an income generator, or something that you could set up as a funded program, then we are gathering quite a lot of information about what works, what doesn't work, and what other organisations we could link you up with who might provide some help. Within this report, we did some kind of analysis by producing what we call opportunity maps, that basically came up with a kind of radar graph like this. I won't talk through it in great depth, but we tried to analyse with all these case studies how scalable it is, what the financial situation is. In other words, you know, for example, what's the cost of entry, how profitable is it, and so on. Analysing the risks, analysing the issues around people partnerships, how volunteer heavy it is, and so on and so forth. This is the example for paint recycling. Basically, those kind of radar graphs emanating from the centre, the further go out to the outside, the kind of easier and the more advantageous those particular factors are. And then we also, within that, started to try and measure. So the first one we looked at was the viability, really, for organisations. And this is a first stab at trying to measure the actual effects on emissions or other measures that we could aggregate up. So in short, the green is where we started to make some progress on measuring, and then the blue are where actually some of this stuff is really difficult to measure and to aggregate. Less so in terms of the community energy type initiatives, but when you get into doing some of these other initiatives, it gets quite difficult. Really important for underpinning all this is this whole thing about how to communicate work we're doing in climate, and this is slightly referred to before, and particularly now in terms of some aspects of the political environment, and a lot of thinking at the moment. And for example, the current funding round from the lottery and the Climate Action Fund is very much focused on how we can introduce initiatives that are effectively climate initiatives, but in ways that reach out to impinge on the issues that affect ordinary people. So what we call in the core benefits, and I think these can be health, in terms of air quality, in terms of kind of activity, reduce fuel poverty. You know, a kind of big thing for me is always looking at this as not so much, looking at kind of green skills and the green jobs and the opportunities for this as a kind of growth sector in terms of the environmental sector, and how local communities can benefit from that. Looking at how community organisations can be centres for resilience and adaptation, looking at warm or cool spaces, for example. One organisation is working within in London is specifically working in its local area just to create more green spaces and more shaded spaces where people can go. Equity and social cohesion, and this all feeds into climate justice, really just the recognition that the effects of climate change often affect disproportionately those people who are probably contributed to the creation of global warming and so on the least, and recognizing that in the programs that we develop. And now switching to how we can help, a little bit about a sort of a little bit of a plug for locality. We obviously have our policy research. I've referred to that report as an example of that. We are very keen to encourage peer support and learning. And as we've had some of that today for Bradford Trident, but we have, we do as across the locality membership, encourage peer learning from people who've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. Probably the best way to learn. We do have a lot of partnership programs. In fact, everything we do is in partnership. And there's an example coming up very shortly about working with the partnership with Groundwork. I like to think we would be doing and have done in the past more partnership work with SIB. That would be great. And other organisations. But also we have a team of consultants across the country who are really geared up and keen to support organisations at different stages of developing their climate or co-benefit related projects. And just to flag up, I think fairly quickly, a few examples. Love Withington Baths, community-owned swimming baths in Manchester, and we focused on a small piece of work there. They've done quite a lot of work already in carbon reduction along the lines of Trident, and they particularly want to start looking at active travel plans. We will also provide some assistance with that. Work with local authorities. This is an example of some work we did with Frome Town Council, data research, funding needs assessments. And this is a kind of growing area of work for us, really. We're kind of quite experienced in working with local authorities, if you like, as the bridge builder between communities, local authorities, and working across that field to look at community engagement and planning together. And we're particularly keen to grow that area of work. I think particularly well placed to work with local authorities on that. Birmingham Settlement, this was a little bit more in tune with what we've been talking about today, about just looking at options for energy efficiency. I mentioned we work in partnership. We particularly do loads of stuff on Funder Plus, so working alongside funders to provide, if you like, non-cash support where funders are providing the cash support. So we partnered with Groundwork and other partners on the BCSE Energy Efficiency Fund, both initially part of the assessment team, but then also helping to iron out kind of knotty problems that successful grantees had with the implementation of what they're aiming to do. I think I've got a couple of final examples. This is a great one. This is one I was involved in. A small cafe in Brixton, South London, really keen to be contributing in the local area to net zero. At the same time, this was a piece of business planning support to the organisation, something that we do loads of. So we kind of combined those two things, really. And one of the things we did was link up with this organisation, Net Zero Now, who have got a kind of platform which is specifically able to measure the footprint of catering businesses. So that's what you see, the dashboard in front of you on that. And we can work at small things, big things on the left-hand side. Just working at the moment on developing sustainability policy for a community organisation. That's something we can do. And on the right, that was a small piece of feasibility work for an existing community shop who were thinking about expanding into doing a circular economy kind of furniture reuse. So, you know, we were able to spend a few days doing desktop research, doing a visit to an existing company, putting together initial costings and options and scenarios for them to inform their way forward. That was kind of well received. And those are sorts of things we can do. Let's move on quickly because we've just got a few minutes left just to flag up some funding ideas. We always like to throw in a few funding ideas at the end, apart from obviously the excellent Energy Resilience Fund. Other funders are available. Here's a couple of sources you may go to. My Community is a partnership web platform that we're part of, along with several other organisations, but I'll particularly direct you to the My Community Capital Funding Directory, which we developed specifically for Community Ownership Fund legacy projects, and the link is there. Centre for Sustainable Energy, our friends there are, we've mentioned already several times, but they do have a regularly updated directory of funding sources for community projects specifically. And they've just finally dug out a few possible funding ideas to flag up here. Obviously, Energy Resilience Fund we talked about, Great British Energy Community Fund, which is the net zero hubs, which are have been referred to already. So net zero hubs being developed and hosted in all combined authorities. Stobart Sustainability Fund, I actually just thought that was an interesting one. Eddie Stobart decided to do this. I have no idea, actually, there isn't much information on the website of that, but I thought it was quite interesting. You basically just have to tell them what you want to do. BIFA award, main grants, you remember you have to be within 5 miles of a BIFA site. Energy redress scheme through the Energy Saving Trust. And in fact, when I did a bit of a kind of funder search to populate this slide, a lot of local funds, a lot of this stuff is available locally. Local energy funds, carbon offset funds, often within local authorities. Community foundations come up a lot in terms of providing funding. So do, you know, look around locally as well. So with that, I think we're at about the end of our webinar. So just throwing it open to any final words from any participants, and I don't see any final chats. Thank you, attendees, for attending and sticking with us to the end. Johannes or other colleagues, any final comments?
No, thank you very much. We'll send a follow-up email with a few of the links, but hopefully you've been able to copy them down anyway. Thank you very much for joining. And thank you very much again to all of our contributors that came in to make this a really rich session.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all. Thank you.
And thanks to Laura in the back office practicing the Zoom dark arts. See you all.